He returned from war without a wound, but he didn't return whole. Deathdream 1974 never marketed itself as more than a modest horror feature, but under its modest budget and eerie stillness, it hides a scream muffled by suburban curtains, by family denial, by the lie that some people ever really come home. Director Bob Clark took a short story about cursed wishes and twisted it into a slow-moving collapse, where the terror isn't that the dead rise, it's that they act like nothing happened. Andy Brooks doesn't moan or rot in the open. He smiles, he hugs his mother, and then he starts to unravel. But this story doesn't end on screen. The deeper you dig into Deathdream, the more fractures appear. Cameras malfunctioned, scenes were cut without explanation, a performance turned real, a final frame that doesn't belong to any known version. Even today, no two versions of the film sound exactly the same. This isn't a simple list of trivia. This is a dissection of a film that never fully settled into one genre, one message, or even one shape. Something was wrong beneath the celluloid. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Deathdream 1974. Fact Hasson. The opening shot nearly ended the film. The first gunshot in Deathdream is abrupt, loud, and final. A soldier jerks violently as bullets tear through him and drops face first into dirt. It plays like a horror freeze frame. That's because it almost became one literally. During this opening combat scene, actor Richard Backus was too close to a prop explosion triggered early. The sudden flash and concussive force stunned him. His knees buckled and he collapsed. No one yelled cut. The camera kept rolling as crew members assumed he was following direction. He wasn't. For nearly half a minute, Backus lay motionless, his arms twisted unnaturally beneath him. Paramedics later confirmed a brief loss of consciousness. Rather than reshoot, Clark used the footage as is. The unsettling rigidity in Backus's fall wasn't staged, it was real. Was it poor safety protocol? Or the first sign that something wasn't meant to go as planned? Fact #2. Silence did more damage than screaming ever could. After the battlefield fades to black, Deathdream shifts to a quiet kitchen table. A letter arrives. Andy is dead. No dialogue follows, just stillness. It's one of the most paralyzing scenes in the film, and it almost didn't happen. Producers were uneasy about the lack of reaction. They wanted tears, outbursts, music. Clark refused. He told the actors to freeze in real time, to say nothing, and to let the camera run until the tension became unbearable. Mary Jackson, playing the mother, held her breath so long she nearly passed out. The entire scene was filmed in a single take. Test viewers reported feeling physically ill after watching it. One described it as grief with a gun to your head. Even now, the scene is rarely referenced in horror discussions because it doesn't look like horror. But that might be why it cuts deeper. Fact #3. Andy's arrival was a ghost effect in disguise. When Andy reappears on the family porch, the moment feels off. He stands too still, the lighting is too flat, and no one seems to make eye contact with him. That effect wasn't planned, it was logistical. Richard Backus wasn't available the night of shooting. Rather than delay, Clark used a double, a body matched for height, kept in darkness. The family's reactions were filmed to empty space, with only a stagehand giving visual cues. Backus's insert shots were captured days later and composited using basic optical tricks. The result? A first appearance that feels disconnected. Spectral like Andy exists in a slightly different layer of reality. Most viewers can't articulate what's wrong with that scene. They just know something's not right. Which begs the question, is it the acting, the editing, or is the film trying to warn you from the start? Fact #4. The dog didn't act, it reacted. One of the first signs that something is wrong with Andy isn't human, it's canine. The family dog refuses to approach him, barking violently, pacing in circles, then disappearing off screen. The next time we see it, it's dead. None of that aggression was rehearsed. The animal used in the scene was trained to remain calm on command. But the moment Richard Backus stepped onto the set in full costume, the dog snapped, it snarled, backed away, and nearly broke its leash. The director decided to let the animal continue, instructing the camera crew to stay rolling. The growling and panic we see in the final cut, completely unscripted. Later, the trainer said, "It wasn't the makeup, it wasn't the lights. The dog just didn't want to be near him. And I didn't either." No one had the courage to try a second take. Fact #5. The mirror didn't lie, but the equipment did. Alone in the bathroom, Andy studies himself in the mirror. He doesn't speak. He barely breathes. His reflection follows every movement almost. Behind that minimal scene lies a technical nightmare. The footage was plagued by repeated malfunctions, blurred exposures, sound dropout, and at one point, an unexpected hairline crack appeared in the mirror after setup. But the most baffling issue was playback. On the third attempt to capture the shot, the recorded footage showed a delay. Andy moved, but his reflection trailed him by a fraction of a second. Technicians blamed a syncing error between camera and lens. They reshot again. Still, the delay persisted. Clark, refusing to waste time, leaned into the glitch. "If it's broken," he said, "then let it feel broken." The unease that hangs over that moment isn't just acting. It's a fracture that even film couldn't correct. Fact #6. The dinner sequence was engineered to feel wrong. At first glance, the dinner scene seems simple, a family reunion over cold food and colder silences. But something about the rhythm is disturbing: delays between lines, unnatural gazes, as if time itself were hesitating. That's no accident. Clark wanted the scene to feel subtly inhuman. To achieve this, he had the actors recite their lines backward phonetically, syllable by syllable, then reverse the audio and video in post-production. The result is nearly imperceptible unless you know to look for it. A strange cadence, empty pauses, breaths that don't line up with movement. Most audiences never notice, but they feel it. One editor remarked, "It was the first scene I ever cut that made me anxious. Not because of what happened, but because of how little happened and how long it took to happen." Fact #7. No one was supposed to film that night. After Andy arrives, the film skips ahead. He's home, but restless. One night, he disappears. We don't know where he goes. Originally, we were supposed to find out. Bob Clark had planned a surreal nighttime montage. Andy drifting through suburban streets, pausing under streetlights, watching strangers sleep. But when the scheduled crew failed to show due to a location mix-up, Clark made a choice. He picked up a handheld 16mm camera, grabbed a flashlight, and followed Richard Backus through the neighborhood with no permits, no lights, no plan. They captured barely usable footage, grainy, underexposed. In one shot, a woman stares through a window directly at camera. She wasn't an extra. No one recognized her. That take was pulled from the final cut, but Clark kept the atmosphere, what he called the sleepwalking energy. Viewers say they sense something stalking the frame. They're right, and it might have been watching both sides of the lens. Fact #8. The syringe was real. So was the panic. In one of the film's most disturbing moments, Andy corners a delivery driver in the basement and injects him with a needle. There's no scream, just a long exhale and collapse. That wasn't a trick needle. While close-ups were done with prosthetics, the wide shot used a live stunt performer and a real syringe carefully sterilized and inserted just beneath the skin. The idea was to show blood moving inside the tube, adding realism. They got more than they bargained for. One crew member fainted. Another dropped the boom mic. The director refused to yell "cut" until the final breath was exhaled. When neighbors heard muffled screaming through the basement wall, they called the police. Officers arrived mid-take and demanded playback before being convinced it was a film set. The footage stayed in, but no one ever attempted a second take. Fact #9. The doctor scene wasn't scripted for terror until an accident changed everything. At one point, the family physician visits Andy to check on his condition. What begins as polite concern turns to suspicion, then fear. What wasn't planned was how intense that fear became. Earlier that day, the actor playing the doctor had been involved in a minor car crash. He showed up to set visibly shaken, still gripping a cup of cold coffee with both hands. Clark saw an opportunity. He rewrote the scene on the spot. Make it all take place in the car. No lights, no setups. Just let the real adrenaline do the acting. Richard Backus leaned into the moment, his silence longer, his stares more hollow. The car windows fogged during filming. The camera picked up the doctor's hands trembling. Nothing was exaggerated. Nothing needed to be. As Clark later said, sometimes the most honest terror comes from the moments we didn't plan. Fact #0. The murder was one take, because they couldn't recreate it. The moment Andy kills the town, doctor is brief but brutal. A sudden movement, a collapse, then silence. What looks like a clean, efficient murder hides a production scramble behind the camera. They only filmed it once because no other take worked. The blood pack went off too early. The prosthetic neck split at the wrong angle. The camera lens caught a spray of red that smeared the edge of the frame. Clark was furious. But when they watched playback, something about the awkwardness, the hesitation in the doctor's fall, the raw timing felt right. They tried 4 more times. The staging became too neat. The energy vanished. Clark returned to the first take, imperfect and unrehearsed. and declared it final. Sometimes, horror doesn't need polish. It just needs the feeling of something gone wrong too fast. Fact Hassanon. His skin decayed because the makeup was alive. As the film progresses, Andy's skin takes on a mottled, discolored look. Veins darken, patches flake off, lips grow gray. Most viewers assume it was latex and paint. It wasn't. Alan Ormsby, the film's special effects designer, used a concoction of glycerin, corn syrup, and actual cultivated bread mold. The intention was to give the skin a slightly fuzzy, decomposing texture on camera. But under hot lights, that mixture fermented and grew, releasing a rancid smell that filled the set. Richard Backus began experiencing skin irritation and refused to wear the full facial prosthetics for more than 20 minutes at a time. By day 4 of cemetery filming, the makeup was literally crawling with microflora, and flies began to appear in shots. Editors had to digitally blur certain frames decades later during restoration. When asked why he didn't switch materials, Ormsby shrugged, "Because death doesn't smell like rubber." Fact Hasontu. The cop wasn't acting. He was confused. At one point, a police officer questions Andy. The exchange is cold, clipped, and strange. Andy gives vague answers. The cop's voice wavers. Something feels off. What you're watching isn't scripted performance, it's a real breakdown in communication. Clark gave both actors minimal direction, instructing them to improvise a tense interrogation. But he only told one of them that Andy was the killer. The officer, played by John Marley, genuinely didn't know the backstory. His lines were real questions. When Backus refused to respond, Marley lost his footing first, emotionally, then physically. He misread the silence as personal hostility. In one take, Marley muttered off camera, "Is this guy even in character?" Clark kept it, because the moment wasn't just eerie, it was genuine disbelief, captured by mistake and repurposed as dread. Fact Hasson 3. The confrontation was so real, it broke the crew. The moment Andy's father finally stands up to him is a turning point in Deathdream. In the garage, tempers flare, and the confrontation escalates into sudden violence. The scene crackles with raw energy, and not by accident. Bob Clark told the actors to play it unscripted, to push the physical boundaries without warning. When Backus grabbed Marley's collar and slammed him against the wall, no one saw it coming. A boom operator, startled by the sound and force, dropped the mic and ran off set, convinced a real fight had broken out. The audio was ruined. They had to recreate the dialogue in post, but Clark insisted on using the footage anyway, even with compromised sound. "We'll dub it," he said, "but we won't fake the fear." The eyes in that scene don't blink. The veins are real, and one of the men never spoke to the other again after filming wrap. Fact Hasson 4. The rot wasn't simulated. It was spoiling. By the final act, Andy's body begins to fail. His skin peels, his movements slow, his face becomes sunken and diseased. The realism is disturbing, and it should be. The reason? The materials used to create the makeup were decaying in real time. The FX team had experimented with a meat-based gelatin compound for texture, but as filming stretched into the humid Florida nights, the mix began to rot. Flies appeared. A bitter, chemical stench filled the air. Richard Backus began refusing to eat lunch in costume. One shot shows a bead of sweat rolling down his cheek, except it wasn't sweat. It was fluid from the degrading prosthetic. Crew members wore masks during filming. Some got sick. The footage, however, was deemed too effective to scrap. Even decades later, you can still see the shadows moving across his jawline. They weren't added in post. They were living things. Fact Hasson 5. One scene was removed because it asked the wrong question. Among the deleted scenes of Deathdream is a moment so subtle, many forget it was ever filmed. Andy, walking through a neighbor's home in the dark, pauses before a military portrait. He salutes, then disappears back into the night. The footage was deemed unnecessary by the studio, but Clark believed otherwise. For him, it was the key to Andy's character, not a monster, but a shell of a soldier, trying to find meaning in death. Executives disagreed. The shot never aired. It was labeled overtly political, too suggestive of anti-war sentiment, and inappropriate for a horror release. To this day, the reel is missing. Some say Clark kept a private copy, others claim it was lost during editing, but the question it asked remains, if the monster remembers who he was, is he still a monster? Fact Hashanex. The ending wasn't fiction, it was memory. The film's final act takes Andy and his mother to the cemetery, where he willingly lowers himself into his grave. It's quiet, no monsters, no violence, just resignation. It's one of the most powerful images in Deathdream, and it was drawn directly from Bob Clark's past. In interviews, Clark spoke of attending a military funeral as a boy, watching as a grieving mother collapsed onto a coffin in the rain, refusing to let go. That moment stayed with him for decades. The stillness, the thunder, the soil folding in. He restaged it almost exactly for Deathdream. The coffin, the body, the mother refusing to leave. Even the lighting was matched to the memory. Nothing about the scene feels exaggerated because it wasn't invented. It was a director's childhood grief, transferred onto film. And maybe that's why it hits harder than any scream ever could. FACT, Hasson 7, the grave was already reserved. The production didn't build a fake grave for Andy's burial. Instead, they were given access to an active cemetery with permission to use an empty plot for filming. What no one realized until later was that the grave had been assigned to a World War II veteran whose family had delayed the funeral by a week. When the time came to use it for the burial, something was off. Cemetery staff found traces of prosthetic glue, fake blood, and signs that a body or someone in full makeup had recently been inside. The family, disturbed by the discovery, demanded a different burial location. That particular plot remains unused. Locals claim nothing will grow on that patch. Others say it's kept unmarked on purpose. One groundskeeper called it a hole that never settled. Fact Hasson 8. The final audio refused to behave. As the credits begin to roll on Deathdream, a faint, eerie tone bleeds into the soundtrack like a radio out of tune or something old trying to speak. That sound wasn't added. In fact, the crew spent weeks trying to remove it. Audio engineers noticed a strange distortion in the final few seconds of the master reel. It wasn't there during mixing, only during the export. They checked the hardware, replaced cables, re-recorded sections. Each time, the interference returned. And it was always slightly different, sometimes a hum, sometimes a pulse, once a whispering static that spelled nothing but felt like something. Even in later digital restorations, pulled from entirely separate sources, the anomaly persists. It's never in the same spot, but it's always near the end. One technician described it as a sound that doesn't belong to any layer of the film. Another simply said, maybe it's not in the film at all. Fact Hasson 9. The premiere left audiences silent and not because of fear. At its first screening, Deathdream played in a modest local theater, far from the Hollywood circuit. The room was half full. No one expected more than a niche horror flick. By the end of the film, 3 people had collapsed in their seats. It didn't happen during the kill scenes. It happened during moments of silence when Andy stares into space, when the mother whispers nothing, when the wind hums across the graveyard. One audience member said it felt like the film punched a hole in the room. Emergency services were called, though no one was physically harmed. One viewer simply wouldn't speak. Another had to be let out. Even stranger, the projectionist later refused to run the film again, claiming the reel didn't spin right, and that during the last reel, he heard what sounded like a heartbeat behind the sound. That original print? It went missing from the archive not long after. It has never been recovered. Fact #20, the final version wasn't the one Clark approved. Directors fight hard to protect their vision. But by the time Deathdream was finished, Bob Clark had stepped away from the editing room entirely. He later admitted to friends that he no longer felt connected to it, as if the film had taken a turn he couldn't follow. What's stranger is that no one remembers completing the final cut. The assistant editor swore the fade-outs were different. The sound team denied, adding the final wind sequence. Even the credits had names reordered without explanation. When asked, Clark shrugged. If the film wants to tell itself a different way, let it. To this day, no one has located the official locked cut Clark originally signed off on. Every version that exists on VHS, DVD, or digital shows slight variations in timing, audio, and color grading, almost as if the film keeps adjusting itself. Bonus fact: 1 frame, no source, no explanation. In 2002, while preparing a high-resolution transfer of Deathdream for a specialty Blu-ray release, a digital restoration artist stumbled upon something that wasn't in the film until it was. While frame scrubbing the final act, he paused at exactly 1 hour, 23 minutes, and 47 seconds. There, in the middle of a crossfade, was a single image that didn't belong. A photo grainy, poorly lit of a soldier in uniform, standing over a zipped-up body bag. No actors, no stage, just a man and a date, the 6th of March, 1972, scrawled in chalk on the wall behind him. The issue? No such image exists in the original reels. It's not on the negative. It's not listed in production stills. And that date predates the film's first shooting day by nearly 3 months. Technicians tried to isolate the frame. It vanished on export. It couldn't be recovered. The only proof it ever existed was a screenshot, which the editor kept and refused to share publicly. When shown to a retired veteran, he responded with a whisper, "That's not from a movie. Digital artifact? Hidden code? Or something the film absorbed over time?" Sometimes, the things you find while restoring the dead aren't meant to be seen at all. Was Andy a ghost, a victim, or just a reflection of what war leaves behind? Tell us in the comments which moment in Deathdream disturbed you most, and whether you believe a film can absorb something unintended during its making. And if you know another movie that feels like it wasn't entirely filmed by the living, let us know. We're still listening.